You know the story they tell you about D-Day. Allied heroes storming the beaches, Nazi defenses crumbling, liberation at last. But nobody talks about the French families who woke up that morning to find their world becoming a battlefield. 20,000 civilians lived in the landing zones. What happened to them when 150,000 soldiers arrived? Where did they go? How many survived? The answer sits in French archives, German reports, and unmarked graves that nobody wants to discuss. If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from French National Archives and U.S. Army After Action reports. Now back to the story. June 6, 1944. 03:30 hours. The first shells hit Sainte-Mère-Église. Marie Le Breton is feeding her baby when her kitchen window explodes. Glass cuts her face. The baby screams. Outside, American paratroopers are landing in her apple orchard. Some hang dead from the trees. Others are shooting at German patrols moving through her village. She grabs the baby and runs to her cellar. She doesn't know that by nightfall, her house will be rubble and her neighbors will be corpses. The Allied plan called it acceptable losses. Operation Overlord required softening coastal defenses with massive bombardment. 12,000 tons of bombs would fall on Normandy that morning. Artillery would follow. The planners knew civilians lived there. They also knew those civilians had to die for the invasion to succeed. Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder wrote in his after-action report, "Civilian casualties were anticipated and accepted as necessary for mission success." Caen takes the worst of it. The RAF drops 2,500 bombs on the city center at 0100 hours. The target is German headquarters in the Abbaye aux Hommes. The bombs miss. Instead, they hit residential blocks where 3,000 families are sleeping. The Rue Saint-Pierre collapses entirely. 47 buildings gone. Bodies pile 8 feet deep in the rubble. Rescue workers count 462 dead in the first hour. More are buried too deep to reach. Madame Suzanne Leclerc survives because she sleeps in her basement. Her daughter Colette does not. The 12-year-old girl was upstairs getting water when the ceiling came down. Suzanne digs with her bare hands for 6 hours. She finds Colette's body at dawn, crushed beneath a stone beam that took 4 men to move. The local priest, Father Auguste Morel, records the death in his parish register. Colette Leclerc, age 12. Killed by Allied bombs while fetching water for her sick grandmother. German forces make it worse. Waffen-SS units execute civilians they suspect of helping paratroopers. In Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, Oberfuhrer Wilhelm Mohnke's men line up 17 villagers against the church wall. The crime, giving directions to lost American soldiers. The execution takes place at 1400 hours on June 6th. Local records show the victims included 2 teenagers and a 73-year-old man who was blind. SS Unterscharführer Hans Stern later testified, "Orders were clear. Civilian cooperation with enemy forces meant death." The killing spreads. At Hauteville-la-Hubert, German troops discover an American paratrooper hiding in Henri Voltier's barn. They shoot Voltier, his wife, and their 3 children, ages 14, 9 and 6. Then they burn the barn with the bodies inside. Voltier's neighbor, Claude Monet, watches from his window and later tells investigators, "The children were crying when the soldiers dragged them outside." Then came the shots. Artillery makes civilians disappear completely. USS Texas fires 14-inch shells at German positions inland from Omaha Beach. Each shell weighs 1,400 pounds. They overshoot their targets and land in villages 5 miles from the coast. Formigny gets hit at 0615 hours. Population before the shelling, 237 people. Population after, 81. The missing aren't evacuated, they're vaporized. American graves registration teams find scattered remains but cannot identify victims. The official report lists them as unidentified civilian casualties. Some survive by accident. In Vierville-sur-Mer, Baker Paul Hamill is delivering bread when the bombardment begins. His horse panics and runs toward the inland hills. Hamill holds on. When he returns 6 hours later, His bakery is gone. So is his wife, Simone. He finds her wedding ring in the debris but never finds her body. He tells a Red Cross worker, "The horse saved me. If I had been home making bread, you would be digging for my bones too." Others survive by planning. Mayor Jacques Hébert of Runville evacuates his entire village on June 5th after spotting Allied reconnaissance planes. He moves 438 people to caves in the nearby quarries. German soldiers try to stop the evacuation. Hébert shows them a fake order, claiming the caves are needed for ammunition storage. The Germans let them pass. When morning comes, Ranville gets hit by 200 shells. The village is destroyed, but nobody dies. Hébert later writes, "I saved my people by lying to killers." If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from French National Archives and US Army After Action reports. Now back to the story. Medical help doesn't exist. Dr. Marcel Fouquet runs the only hospital serving 12 villages around Utah Beach. When the invasion begins, he has 6 beds and no morphine. By noon, he has 60 wounded civilians and still no morphine. Many die while waiting. Fouquet operates without anesthesia using kitchen knives sterilized in boiling water. His nurse, Sister Marie-Thérèse, keeps a log of treatments. Entry for June 6th. Amputated farmer's leg with saw. Patient conscious throughout. No infection control possible. Children suffer the worst. At Sainte-Mère-Église, 8-year-old André Renaud gets separated from his parents during the fighting. He hides in a ditch for 11 hours while bullets fly overhead. American soldiers find him at nightfall, dehydrated and in shock. He keeps asking for his mother. His parents' bodies are discovered 2 days later in their collapsed house. André becomes one of 214 confirmed orphans created on D-Day. The Red Cross puts him on a train to Paris to live with strangers. Refugees stream inland but find no safety. German commanders order the flooding of low-lying areas to stop Allied advances. They blow up dikes along the Dives River at 0800 hours. Water rushes across farmland where civilian families are fleeing the bombardment. At least 60 people drown in the flood, including entire families caught in the open. Marcel Lefebvre, a postal worker from Cabourg, saves himself by climbing an oak tree. He watches a mother and baby get swept away by the current. The bodies are never found. Food runs out immediately. Allied bombing destroys supply routes. German forces requisition remaining stocks for military use. By June 7th, villages have no bread, no milk, no medicine. Children start showing signs of hunger. Marie Dupont of Courseulles-sur-Mer writes in her diary, "Little Jean has not eaten in 2 days. The baby cries constantly. German soldiers took our last potatoes. They said we are enemies now." Some civilians become weapons. The resistance uses D-Day chaos to settle old scores. In Bayeux, they execute 12 suspected collaborators without trial. The victims include a schoolteacher who taught German language classes and a farmer who sold milk to Wehrmacht units. Resistance leader Pierre Bouchard later admits, "We used liberation as cover for murder. Some deserved it, others did not." Allied soldiers make it worse through accidents. At Pointe du Hoc, American Rangers mistake fleeing civilians for German reinforcements. They open fire with automatic weapons. 7 civilians die, including 2 children. Sergeant William Blake reports, "In the smoke and confusion, everyone looked like the enemy. We shot first and asked questions later." The mistake gets buried in official records as enemy casualties engaged at close range. Communication breaks down completely. Telephone lines are cut, radio stations go off the air, villages lose contact with the outside world. Nobody knows who controls what territory. Civilians caught between opposing forces face execution from both sides if they guess wrong about which uniform to trust. Father Louis Deschamps of Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer writes, "We became strangers in our own land. Every soldier looked like a killer. The worst happens at night. Darkness hides unit identification. Nervous troops shoot at movement. Lost paratroopers kill civilians. They mistake for German patrols. German patrols kill civilians. they mistake for resistance fighters. Between June 6th and 8th, friendly fire and mistaken identity killings account for 137 civilian deaths. The number comes from parish burial records, cross-referenced with military after-action reports. Prisoners become shields. German forces retreat inland, taking civilian hostages. They plan to use them as human shields during the fighting withdrawal. At Villers-Bocage, SS troops load 43 villagers onto trucks. The convoy gets strafed by Allied fighters near Hill 117. 28 civilians die in the burning trucks. The survivors are abandoned by their captors and spend 3 days walking back to their destroyed village. Bodies pile up with nowhere to bury them. Parish cemeteries fill beyond capacity. The ground is too hard from drought to dig new graves quickly. Corpses rot in summer heat. Disease spreads. Father Antoine Bouvet of Tilly-sur-Seulles records burials in mass graves. June 9th, buried 14 civilians in common grave behind church. Names unknown. Bodies too damaged for identification. May God forgive us for this necessity. Liberation brings new horrors. Allied troops discover civilian massacres and blame all Germans. They execute prisoners without trial as revenge. Canadian forces at Orthy kill 18 captured Wehrmacht soldiers after finding dead French children. Major John Williamson writes, "The men were beyond reason. They had seen too much. I could not stop them." The executions violate Geneva Conventions, but nobody gets prosecuted. Recovery takes years. Villages remain dangerous long after D-Day due to unexploded ordnance. Booby traps kill farmers returning to their fields. Mines blow up children playing in ruins. The weekly newspaper in Bayeux tracks post-invasion civilian deaths through 1946. Total, 312 additional casualties from unexploded devices, structural collapses, and contaminated water supplies. Compensation never comes. The French government promises to rebuild and repay civilian losses. Most claims get rejected due to inadequate documentation. How do you prove property value when the property is atoms? How do you document personal belongings when the house is a crater? Marie Durand of Bernières-sur-Mer spends 20 years fighting for compensation after losing her husband, 2 children, and farm in the bombardment. She receives 1,000 francs in 1964. The amount equals $37. Official numbers hide the truth. Allied records count 3,000 civilian casualties on D-Day. French records count 8,400. The difference comes from classification disputes. Are civilians killed by German forces defending against Allied attack counted as liberation casualties or occupation casualties? Are refugees who die fleeing combat zones counted as combat deaths or displacement deaths? The bureaucratic questions matter because they determine compensation and memorial recognition. Some stories never get told. Families disappear completely with nobody left to report them missing. Villages vanish so thoroughly that post-war maps show empty spaces where communities once stood. At Azeville, population dropped from 412 to 67 between June 5th and June 15th. The missing aren't listed as casualties because there are no survivors to file reports. They simply stop existing in official records. Physical evidence tells a different story. In 1993, construction workers in Caen discover a mass grave containing 52 skeletons. Forensic analysis shows they died from crushing injuries consistent with building collapse. Carbon dating confirms death occurred in June 1944. None of the victims appear in official casualty lists. The grave suggests systematic undercounting of civilian deaths. Women face particular horrors. German soldiers retreat through villages, taking female hostages for field brothels. Wehrmacht records seized at Falaise show requisition orders for comfort personnel from occupied villages. At least 87 women between ages 15 and 45 disappear from coastal communities during the German withdrawal. Most are never seen again. Marguerite Roussel of Port-en-Bessin escapes by hiding in a pig pen for 4 days. She later testifies, "They took my sister. She was only 16. I heard her screaming from the truck." Allied forces contribute to the problem. American GIs desperate for female company assault. French women they're supposed to be liberating. Military police reports from June 8th through June 15th document 34 cases of rape by Allied personnel in liberated areas. Victims include a nun, Sister Catherine Marie, assaulted by 3 soldiers in the ruins of her convent. The perpetrators receive minimal punishment. Their unit commander, Colonel James Mitchell, writes, "Men under extreme stress cannot be held to peacetime standards of conduct. Children become feral, orphaned by bombardment. They form survival groups scavenging in ruins. American medic Robert Chen finds a pack of 11 children living in a bombed church near Colleville-sur-Mer. The youngest is 4 years old. They eat raw turnips and drink from puddles. None remember their real names. They communicate through gestures and broken French, mixed with German phrases learned from occupying soldiers. Chen writes, "They moved like wild animals. Trust had been bombed out of them. Black markets explode. Desperate civilians trade family heirlooms for food. German deserters sell military supplies to French villagers. American soldiers barter cigarettes and chocolate for wine and sex. By June 10th, a single can of meat costs more than a month's pre-war wages." Lucien Moreau of Isigny trades his wife's gold wedding ring for 2 loaves of bread and a jar of jam. He tells a Red Cross worker, "Honor does not fill empty stomachs. Disease spreads through contaminated water. Artillery shells rupture sewage systems. Corpses decompose in wells." Typhoid appears first, followed by dysentery and cholera. Dr. Henri Blanchard treats 67 cases of waterborne illness between June 8th and June 12th with no antibiotics and minimal clean water for treatment. His medical log reads, "More civilians will die from disease than from bullets. We are watching medieval plagues return to 20th century France. Psychological damage proves permanent. Shell shock affects civilians as severely as soldiers, but receives no treatment. Children develop selective mutism after witnessing mass death. Adults suffer recurring nightmares and violent outbursts. Marie-Claire Dubois of Ouistreham cannot speak for 6 months after watching her 3-year-old son get crushed by falling masonry. When speech returns, she can only whisper. The village priest notes in his records, "The living envy the dead their silence." Identification becomes impossible. Bombardment destroys municipal records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, property deeds, and identity papers vanish in flames. Thousands of people become legal ghosts with no way to prove who they are or what they owned. This complicates post-war reconstruction and compensation claims. Prefect Jean-Baptiste Lemoine of Calvados Department reports in October 1944, "We are rebuilding a society whose members cannot prove they exist. Collaborators face mob justice. French civilians use liberation chaos to settle scores with neighbors who aided Germans. At Bayeux, angry villagers beat shopkeeper Paul Martineau to death with farming tools. His crime, selling vegetables to Wehrmacht units for 4 years. His wife watches from her window as 23 neighbors take turns striking him. She later tells investigators they were not liberators that day, they were animals. Resistance fighters become predators. Some Maquis groups use their weapons to rob and terrorize civilians instead of fighting Germans. Near Falaise, a group led by Marcel Durand extorts protection money from farming families. Those who refuse payment have their livestock stolen and buildings burned. Durand's band operates for 3 weeks before Canadian forces arrest them. Military records show they stole more from French civilians than they ever took from German forces. American supply mistakes kill civilians. Airdrops intended for paratroopers land on villages instead. Heavy supply containers crush buildings and people. At Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, a misdropped ammunition pallet crashes through the roof of the village school, killing teacher Madame Elizabeth Moreau and 4 children aged 7 to 9. The incident report classifies their deaths as accidental casualties from friendly supply operations. Evacuation orders come too late. Allied commanders finally authorized civilian evacuation on June 7th, 24 hours after heavy bombardment begins. By then, most escape routes are blocked by combat or destroyed by shelling. Those who attempt to flee become targets for nervous soldiers who mistake refugee columns for enemy troop movements. A group of 43 civilians fleeing Tilly-sur-Seulles gets strafed by Allied fighters. 18 die, including 7 children under age 10. German booby traps target civilians specifically. Retreating Wehrmacht engineers wire explosive devices to everyday objects in abandoned villages. Kitchen stoves, water pumps, door handles, and children's toys become deadly. These devices kill returning civilians long after combat ends. Between June and December 1944, booby trap explosions account for 196 additional civilian deaths. Explosive ordnance disposal teams cannot clear all devices due to their quantity and concealment. Medical facilities become battlegrounds. Germans use hospitals as strong points, making them legitimate military targets. The civilian hospital in Caen gets hit by Allied artillery on June 9th while treating wounded civilians. 46 patients die in their beds. Nurse Simone Laurent survives by hiding in the morgue basement. She emerges to find bodies everywhere, some killed by shells, others crushed when the ceiling collapsed. I could not tell which patients died from wounds and which died from rescue. Food poisoning spreads from desperation eating. Starving civilians consume spoiled meat, contaminated grain, and unknown plants. Without proper cooking fuel, they eat food partially cooked or raw. Botulism appears first, followed by various bacterial infections from bad meat. Village doctor Claude Beaumont treats 41 cases of severe food poisoning between June 10th and June 18th. 7 patients die. Beaumont writes, "They would rather risk death from poison than certain death from starvation. Livestock becomes ammunition. Both armies slaughter civilian animals for food, leaving farmers with no livelihood. German forces requisition cattle, pigs, and chickens as they retreat. Allied forces do the same as they advance. Farmer Jean-Baptiste Lecomte of Vers-sur-Mer loses 68 cattle, 40 pigs, and 200 chickens to military requisition. No compensation is offered. Lecomte tells American officers, "You liberated my land but stole my life." Winter brings new deaths. Civilians spend months in ruins with no heating fuel, warm clothing, or adequate shelter. Malnutrition makes them vulnerable to disease and cold. The winter of 1944 kills more Norman civilians than the initial invasion. Parish burial records from December 1944 through March 1945 show 378 deaths attributed to exposure and malnutrition related to war damage. Property theft runs rampant. Allied soldiers loot abandoned houses for souvenirs and valuables. German soldiers steal everything portable while retreating. Civilian refugees return to find their homes stripped bare. Even personal items like photographs, children's clothing, and religious artifacts disappear. Antoinette Girard returns to Courseulles-sur-Mer after 3 weeks in refugee camps to find her house intact, but completely empty. She reports, "They took everything, even my daughter's doll." International aid fails to arrive. Red Cross supplies reach military units first. Civilian populations last. Promised American relief shipments get diverted to support combat operations. British medical supplies intended for French civilians go to treat Allied wounded instead. The few aid packages that reach villages are often spoiled, inadequate, or stolen before distribution. Relief worker Sarah Thompson writes from Bayeux, "We promised these people salvation and delivered slow death instead." Documentation becomes impossible. Record-keeping systems collapse under bombardment and chaos. Deaths go unrecorded when parish priests flee or die. Births occur without medical attention or official registration. Marriages happen without licenses or ceremonies. An entire generation of Normans will lack proper legal documentation of major life events. This creates bureaucratic problems lasting decades after the war ends. The final count remains unknown. French historians estimate between 12,000 and 15,000 civilian deaths directly caused by D-Day operations. German records, captured after the war, suggest the number reaches 20,000 when including executions, displacement deaths, and post-invasion ordnance casualties. Allied records maintain the official figure of 3,000. In 1998, construction workers renovating a Caen subway station discover a sealed basement containing the remains of 37 people, all showing signs of violent death in June 1944. None appear in any casualty list. The bones are quietly reburied without ceremony or investigation.